In the shadowy world of elite military operations, where every mission is classified and every operator's identity is sacred, there exists a legend that even the most battle-hardened Navy SEALs speak of only in whispers. They call him Ghost, not because he's dead, but because officially, he never existed. No birth certificate. No social security number. No fingerprints in any database. No childhood home to return to. Yet somehow, this phantom had become the most lethal and effective operative the Navy SEALs had ever encountered. Picture this: a man who could infiltrate terrorist strongholds without leaving a trace, who spoke 17 languages fluently, who could disappear into any crowd in any country and emerge days later with intelligence that saved thousands of lives. A man who had no past to betray him and no future to lose. The Pentagon's most closely guarded secret wasn't a weapon or a technology, it was a human being who existed in the spaces between official records, operating in a world where his very presence could never be acknowledged. But what happens when such a man finally surfaces? When the ghost becomes flesh and blood, demanding answers about his own existence? When the very people who created him realize they may have unleashed something beyond their control? This is the story of how a nameless guardian shook the foundations of America's most elite fighting force and forced them to confront a truth more dangerous than any enemy they had ever faced. The Navy SEALs thought they knew everything about warfare. They were wrong. Sometimes the greatest threat comes not from outside, but from within, from the monsters we create in the name of protecting freedom. Commander Sarah Mitchell had seen a lot of impossible things during her 15 years with Naval Special Warfare Command, but nothing had prepared her for the manila folder that landed on her desk on a cold Tuesday morning in November. The folder contained just 3 items: a single photograph, a brief mission report, and a DNA analysis that made her blood run cold. The photograph showed a man in his 30s, lean and muscular, with dark hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to look straight through the camera. He wore no uniform, no identifying marks, nothing that would suggest military affiliation. Yet according to the mission report, this man had single-handedly neutralized a terrorist cell in Afghanistan that had been evading capture for 3 years. The operation was so clean, so professional, that initially the intelligence community assumed it was the work of an entire Navy SEAL team. But there was no team. There was only him. Sarah picked up her secure phone and dialed a number she hoped she'd never have to use. After 2 rings, a gravelly voice answered. "Admiral, we have a problem," she said without preamble. "Someone just completed Operation Nightfall." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Admiral James Harrison had been in charge of SEAL Team 6 for over a decade, and Sarah had never known him to be at a loss for words. "That's impossible," he finally said. "We scrubbed that mission 6 months ago. Too dangerous, too many variables." "Sir, I'm looking at photographic evidence and after-action reports from multiple sources. The target compound was hit 3 days ago. 12 enemy combatants neutralized, 0 civilian casualties, primary objective secured. Whoever did this knew every detail of our operational plan." Sarah heard the Admiral's chair creak as he leaned back. She could picture him in his office, surrounded by commendations and photographs from decades of service, trying to process information that challenged everything he thought he knew about military operations. "Send me everything you have," he said. And, Sarah, this conversation never happened. The line went dead. 3 hours later, Sarah found herself in a windowless conference room in the basement of the Pentagon, facing a panel of officials whose security clearances were so high that she didn't recognize half their titles. Admiral Harrison sat at the head of the table, his weathered face grave. "Ladies and gentlemen," the Admiral began, "what I'm about to show you is classified at the highest levels. According to our intelligence, a single individual has successfully completed 3 separate operations that our analysts deemed impossible for anything less than a full special operations team." He clicked a remote, and the wall screen displayed a map of the Middle East with 3 red markers: Afghanistan, Syria, and Yemen. In each case, high-value targets that had evaded capture for years were neutralized with surgical precision. No collateral damage, no trace evidence, and, most importantly, no official involvement from any known military unit. A woman in an expensive suit leaned forward. Sarah didn't recognize her, but the deference shown by everyone else in the room suggested she wielded considerable power.
Admiral, are you suggesting we have a rogue operator?
That's just it, ma'am. According to every database we've checked, this individual doesn't exist.
No military record, no civilian background, no electronic footprint of any kind.
It's as if he materialized out of thin air.
Sarah watched as the DNA report appeared on the screen.
She had read it 3 times, but it still made her stomach churn. The genetic analysis reveals something even more disturbing, Admiral Harrison continued.
This individual's DNA contains markers that suggest extensive genetic modification.
Enhanced reflexes, improved muscle density, altered pain receptors.
This isn't just training, ladies and gentlemen. This is engineering.
The room erupted in whispered conversations.
Sarah saw faces pale and hands tremble as the implications sank in. If someone had the technology to create enhanced soldiers, and if that someone wasn't the United States government, the balance of global power could shift overnight. A man in a dark suit stood up. Admiral, I need to ask the question we're all thinking. Could this be one of ours? Some black project that's gone off the books? Admiral Harrison's jaw tightened. That's what we need to find out.
Over the next week, Sarah found herself leading the most classified investigation in Pentagon history. She interviewed analysts, reviewed decades of black project files, and followed money trails that led to dummy corporations and offshore accounts. Every lead seemed to evaporate just as she got close to answers. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source.
Dr.
Elena Vasquez, a geneticist who had worked on classified projects for the Department of Defense, contacted Sarah through encrypted channels. Commander Mitchell, the woman's voice was shaky over the secure phone line, I've been following the situation with your mystery operative.
I think I know who he is. Dr. Vasquez, how could you possibly, because 20 years ago, I helped create him.
Sarah felt the world shift beneath her feet.
What are you talking about? Project Prometheus.
It was a black project, so deep that even most people with top-secret clearance never knew it existed.
We were tasked with creating the perfect soldier.
Enhanced genetics, memory conditioning, psychological programming. We started with orphan children, kids who had no family, no records, no one who would miss them.
Sarah's mouth went dry. Dr. Vasquez, are you telling me the US government conducted illegal human experimentation?
Not the government, Commander. A shadow organization operating within the government. People with access and resources but no official oversight. When I realized what we were doing, what we had done to those children, I tried to expose it. That's when the project was shut down and all records were destroyed. Or so I thought. What happened to the subjects? They were supposed to be terminated. All traces of the project eliminated. But I helped 3 of them escape. I gave them new identities, placed them with families who would ask no questions. I thought they would live normal lives, forget their conditioning. Sarah gripped the phone tighter. Dr. Vasquez, if this is true, why is this individual operating now? Why reveal himself? The silence stretched for a long moment. When Dr. Vasquez spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. Because someone killed the other 2. And I think he's looking for whoever ordered their deaths. That night, Sarah sat in her apartment, staring out at the city lights and trying to process everything she had learned. Somewhere out there was a man who had been created as a weapon, robbed of his childhood, his identity, his very humanity. A man who possessed skills that made him more dangerous than any terrorist organization. A man who was now hunting the people responsible for destroying his life. Her secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from an unknown number. The message contained only an address and a time, midnight tonight. Sarah knew she should report the message, should call in a full tactical team. Instead, she found herself driving through the empty streets toward a warehouse district on the outskirts of the city. She parked a block away and approached on foot, her hand resting on her sidearm. The warehouse appeared abandoned, but Sarah noticed the subtle signs that someone was maintaining it. Fresh oil stains where vehicles had been parked, recently disturbed dust patterns near the entrances. She circled the building twice before finding an unlocked door. Inside, a single light illuminated a chair in the center of the vast space. Sarah approached cautiously, every instinct screaming that this was a trap. But, as she drew closer, she saw that the chair wasn't empty. A man sat with his back to her, completely motionless. She could see the photograph from her desk in her mind, but this felt different. More dangerous. "Commander Mitchell," the man said without turning around. His voice was calm, educated, with no trace of an accent.
"Thank you for coming alone."
"You're him," Sarah said, her hand still on her weapon.
"You're the ghost." "Ghost?" He seemed to consider the name. "I suppose that's accurate. I exist in the spaces between official records. But, I assure you, I'm very much alive. What do you want?" The man stood slowly and turned to face her. Sarah had expected someone intimidating, but what struck her most was how normal he appeared. He could have been a teacher, a doctor, a neighbor. Until you looked into his eyes and saw the depth of calculation behind them. "I want what any man wants, Commander. I want to know who I am. I want to understand why I was created. And I want justice for the people who stole my life. Dr. Vasquez told me about Project Prometheus." "Ah, Dr. Vasquez. One of the few people involved who retained her conscience. She saved my life, you know. Twice, actually. Once when she helped me escape, and once when she taught me that I had a choice in how I used my abilities." Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of the monster she had expected to find. Instead, she saw something that might have been pain. "If you want justice, why not work with us? Help us find the people responsible?" The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Commander, the people responsible aren't hiding in some foreign country. They're here, in Washington, probably in offices just like yours. They have security clearances, congressional contacts, and decades of experience in making problems disappear." "So what's your plan?" "My plan is to do what I was trained to do. Find the target, eliminate the threat, complete the mission. The only difference is that this time, I'm choosing the mission." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "And if I try to stop you?" "You won't," he said with quiet certainty. "Because deep down, you know I'm right. The system you've dedicated your life to serving created me as a weapon and, then, tried to destroy me when I was no longer useful. How many others do you think met the same fate? How many other ghosts are buried in classified files?" He walked past her toward the door, moving with a fluid grace that seemed almost inhuman. "Commander," he said, pausing at the threshold, "in 3 days, the first name on my list will have an accident. A very unfortunate, very public accident. After that, the others will start to panic. They'll make mistakes. And, when they do, I'll be waiting." "What name?" Sarah called after him. But, he was already gone, vanished into the night like the ghost they called him. Sarah stood alone in the warehouse, her mind racing. She thought about Dr. Vasquez's words, about children turned into weapons, about the shadow organizations that operated beyond any oversight. She thought about the oath she had taken to protect and serve her country. The question was, if her country had created this monster, who exactly was she supposed to protect it from? As she walked back to her car, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. Instead of reporting the meeting, instead of calling in tactical teams or alerting her superiors, she would wait. She would watch. And, when the first name on the ghosts list had his accident, she would be ready to follow the trail wherever it led. Because sometimes, Sarah realized, the greatest threat to national security isn't foreign enemies or terrorist organizations. Sometimes it's the secrets we keep from ourselves, the monsters we create in the name of protection, and the ghosts that come back to haunt us when we think the past is safely buried. The hunt had begun, and Sarah Mitchell wasn't sure which side she was on. Dr. Marcus Webb had always been paranoid, but, on the morning of his death, his paranoia reached new heights. The former Pentagon official sat in his McLean mansion, surrounded by enough security equipment to protect a small embassy.
Motion sensors covered every approach, cameras monitored every angle, and armed guards patrolled the perimeter 24 hours a day. Yet none of it would save him from the ghost that had already marked him for death. Commander Sarah Mitchell watched the news report from her office, her coffee growing cold as the reporter described the tragic accident that had claimed Dr. Webb's life. According to witnesses, Webb's armored Mercedes had somehow veered off the road during his morning commute, struck a concrete barrier at high speed, and burst into flames. The car's safety systems had mysteriously failed, the doors wouldn't open, and, by the time emergency responders arrived, there was nothing left but charred metal and ash.
The official investigation would conclude that it was a mechanical failure, a one-in-a-million accident. But Sarah knew better.
She had been tracking Webb's background for 3 days, ever since the ghost had given her his warning. What she had found made her stomach turn. Dr. Marcus Webb had been a rising star in Pentagon R&D 20 years ago, specializing in experimental programs that pushed the boundaries of military science. He had clearance levels that gave him access to projects most generals had never heard of. And, according to Dr. Vasquez's encrypted files, he had been one of the primary architects of Project Prometheus.
Sarah's secure phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number, one down.
Next target, Senator Catherine Ashford.
48 hours. Senator Ashford. Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard as she pulled up everything she could find about the woman.
Chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, former CIA director, one of the most powerful people in Washington. On the surface, she appeared to be exactly what she claimed, a dedicated public servant with an impeccable record. But Sarah was beginning to understand that in the world of black projects and shadow operations, nothing was ever as it appeared. She grabbed her jacket and headed for the door. If the ghost was planning to target a sitting senator, Sarah needed to understand exactly what they were dealing with. And she needed to make a choice about whether to stop him or help him. The Georgetown townhouse that served as Dr. Elena Vasquez's home was a fortress disguised as academic respectability. Sarah noticed the reinforced windows, the subtle camera placements, the way the garden had been designed to eliminate blind spots. Dr. Vasquez was clearly a woman who had learned to live with dangerous secrets.
Commander Mitchell, Dr. Vasquez said as she opened the door. I was wondering when you would come.
The interior of the house was a study in contrasts. Bookcases lined the walls, filled with scientific journals and medical texts, but Sarah noticed the gun safe in the corner and the panic room door hidden behind a bookshelf. This was the home of someone who had spent 20 years looking over her shoulder.
Dr. Vasquez, I need to know everything about Project Prometheus. Not just the basics you told me before. Everything.
The older woman poured 2 cups of tea with hands that trembled slightly.
Commander, there are some secrets that are better left buried. Dr. Webb is dead. The ghost contacted me and said Senator Ashford is next.
If I'm going to have any chance of stopping a war between him and the government, I need to understand what really happened.
Dr. Vasquez set down her cup and walked to a wall safe hidden behind a painting of DNA helixes.
She withdrew a thick folder marked with classifications that Sarah had never seen before.
Project Prometheus began in 1995, Dr. Vasquez said, settling into her chair. The official goal was to enhance human performance for military applications. Genetic modification to improve strength, speed, reflexes, pain tolerance. We told ourselves we were creating super soldiers to protect America. But that wasn't the real goal? No.
The real goal was to create assassins. Perfect killers who could operate anywhere in the world without leaving traces. The genetic modifications were just the beginning. We also worked on psychological conditioning, memory manipulation, emotional suppression. We wanted to create human beings who could kill without hesitation, without remorse, without the normal psychological limitations that prevent people from becoming monsters.
Sarah felt sick. And you used children for this? Orphans, mostly. Children who had been abandoned, abused, forgotten by the system.
We told ourselves we were giving them purpose, a chance to serve their country. The truth is, we were stealing their humanity.
Dr. Vasquez opened the folder and withdrew a photograph.
It showed a young boy, maybe 8 years old, with the same piercing blue eyes that Sarah recognized from the warehouse meeting. But, in the child's face, she could see something that was absent in the adult, innocence.
That was Subject 17.
He was the most successful of our experiments. Enhanced reflexes 40% above baseline, pain tolerance increased by 60%, muscle density improved by 30%. But, more importantly, he showed perfect adaptation to the psychological conditioning. No emotional attachments, no moral limitations, complete obedience to commands.
What was his name?
That's just it, Commander.
We never gave them real names.
They were just numbers. Subject 17 had no past, no identity, no sense of self beyond what we programmed into him. We thought that made him perfect for our purposes. Sarah studied the photograph, trying to reconcile the innocent child with the dangerous man she had met.
What went wrong? Dr. Vasquez laughed bitterly.
What went wrong is that we succeeded too well. By the time Subject 17 was 16, he had become everything we had hoped for and more.
He could speak dozens of languages, infiltrate any environment, eliminate targets without leaving evidence.
He was the perfect weapon.
So why shut down the project?
Because we realized we had created something we couldn't control.
Subject 17 started asking questions.
About his past, about the purpose of the missions, about the morality of what he was being asked to do. The conditioning was breaking down, and, underneath it, we found something we hadn't expected.
What? A conscience.
Despite everything we had done to him, despite years of psychological manipulation and emotional suppression, he retained his humanity. And that made him dangerous in ways we had never anticipated. Dr. Vasquez withdrew another photograph, this one showing 3 teenagers standing together. Sarah recognized one as Subject 17, but the other 2 were strangers. Subjects 15, 16, and 17 were the only survivors of the program. Out of 37 children who entered Prometheus, only 3 made it to completion. The others died during the enhancement procedures, suffered psychological breaks, or were terminated when they showed signs of resistance.
Sarah's hands clenched into fists. Terminated? Dr. Webb's decision.
He argued that failed subjects posed a security risk.
Senator Ashford agreed.
They were both very practical about the need to eliminate loose ends. The pieces were starting to fall into place.
So when the project was shut down,
the 3 survivors were supposed to be terminated as well.
Standard procedure for closing down a black project.
But I couldn't do it. I had watched these children grow up, seen their humanity survive despite everything we put them through. So I helped them escape.
And gave them new identities.
Yes. I had contacts who specialized in creating clean backgrounds for intelligence assets. I gave each of them a complete history, placed them with families who wouldn't ask questions, and hoped they would find ways to live normal lives. Sarah thought about the ghost's words in the warehouse, about the others who had been killed.
What happened to Subjects 15 and 16? Dr. Vasquez's face crumpled.
2 months ago, they both died in what appeared to be random accidents. 15 was killed in a car bombing in Europe while working as a security contractor.
16 died in a climbing accident in Colorado. But I know those weren't accidents.
Someone had found them and eliminated them.
Someone who knew about Project Prometheus.
Someone with access to classified files and the resources to track down people who were supposed to have been dead for 20 years. Someone who realized that the surviving subjects posed a threat to everyone involved in the original project. Sarah understood now why the ghost had begun his hunt. It wasn't just about revenge for his stolen childhood. It was about survival. Someone was systematically eliminating the evidence of Project Prometheus, and he was the last piece of that evidence still breathing.
Dr.
Vasquez,
I need the complete list of everyone involved in the project. Not just Webb and Ashford. Everyone. The woman hesitated.
Commander, some of those people are now in positions of incredible power. Generals, cabinet members, directors of intelligence agencies.
If you go after them, you'll be taking on the entire shadow government. Then, that's what I'll do.
As Sarah drove back through the city, her mind raced with the implications of what she had learned.
Project Prometheus wasn't just a historical atrocity, it was an ongoing crime that reached into the highest levels of government.
And, somewhere out there, a man who had been robbed of his childhood and turned into a weapon was methodically working his way through a list of people who had destroyed countless lives in the name of national security. Her phone buzzed with another message: Ashford will be at the Kennedy Center tomorrow night.
Private box, limited security. She feels safe because she thinks her secrets died with Webb. She's wrong. Sarah stared at the message for a long moment. She could warn Ashford, could call in federal protection, could try to prevent another death.
But doing so would protect someone who had authorized the murder of children and the creation of human weapons. It would also reveal that she was in contact with the ghost, ending her career and any chance she had of bringing justice to the real criminals. Or she could let events unfold, let the ghost eliminate another name from his list, and use the resulting chaos to expose the truth about Project Prometheus. That night, Sarah sat in her apartment and made the hardest decision of her career. She wrote 2 letters, one to Admiral Harrison, explaining everything she had discovered about Project Prometheus, and one to the ghost, providing him with additional intelligence about Senator Ashford's security arrangements. She sealed both letters and placed them in her safe. Tomorrow, depending on how events unfolded, she would deliver one of them. The other would remain her insurance policy, her guarantee that the truth would eventually come to light regardless of what happened to her. As she prepared for bed, Sarah thought about the children who had been sacrificed on the altar of national security. She thought about the men and women who had made those decisions and, then, lived comfortable lives while their victims struggled with the consequences. And she thought about the ghost, hunting alone in the shadows, seeking justice that the system would never provide. By tomorrow night, Senator Catherine Ashford would be dead, and Sarah Mitchell would have to decide once and for all which side of this war she was really on. The side of the institution she had sworn to serve, or the side of the victims those institutions had created and abandoned. Either way, there would be no going back. The ghost had set events in motion that would either destroy the shadow government's hold on power or destroy everyone who stood in their way. And Sarah was about to find out which outcome her conscience could live with. The hunt was accelerating, and the hunted were beginning to realize that their past crimes were catching up with them. In the corridors of power, behind closed doors and in encrypted communications, the survivors of Project Prometheus were starting to panic. And panic, Sarah knew, made people do desperate things. The Kennedy Center was ablaze with light on the night Senator Catherine Ashford died, its grand halls filled with Washington's elite attending a charity gala for military veterans. The irony wasn't lost on Commander Sarah Mitchell as she watched from across the Potomac River, using high-powered binoculars to observe the scene through the center's massive windows. Senator Ashford moved through the crowd like a shark through warm water, her silver hair perfectly styled, her smile practiced and political. She paused frequently to shake hands, to pose for photographs, to whisper confidential words into eager ears. To everyone watching, she appeared to be exactly what she claimed to be, a dedicated public servant supporting America's heroes. But Sarah knew better. She had spent the last 24 hours diving deeper into Ashford's background, following money trails and classified contracts that painted a very different picture. The senator hadn't just authorized Project Prometheus, she had been its primary advocate, pushing for expanded funding and fewer oversight restrictions. She had personally signed the termination orders for failed subjects, viewing them as acceptable losses in the pursuit of military advancement. Sarah's earpiece crackled with encrypted chatter from federal security teams positioned around the Kennedy Center. 3 different agencies were providing protection for various VIPs at the event, but none of them knew about the threat moving through the shadows. The ghost had become invisible to their surveillance, just as he had been trained to do. "Ghost to Mitchell," came a voice so quiet it might have been the wind. Sarah startled, realizing he was communicating on her secure frequency. "How did you get this channel?" she whispered. "I helped design the encryption protocols 20 years ago. Dr. Vasquez was thorough when she showed you my file, I hope." Sarah scanned the area around the Kennedy Center, looking for any sign of him. "Where are you?" "Closer than you think."
Tell me, Commander, have you made your choice? Are you here to stop me or to witness justice?
The question hung in the air between them. Sarah had been asking herself the same thing all day, torn between her duty to protect American officials and her growing understanding of the crimes those officials had committed.
I'm here to learn the truth, she said finally. Good. Because tonight, the truth is going to come out in ways that will shock the world.
Through her binoculars, Sarah watched as Senator Ashford excused herself from a conversation with the Joint Chiefs and headed toward her private box overlooking the main hall. The security detail that followed her was professional but relaxed. They had no idea that their principal had already been marked for death by the most dangerous operative they had never heard of.
Ghost, how do you plan to get past her security? The same way I've gotten past security my entire life. By being what people expect to see rather than what I actually am.
Sarah frowned, trying to understand his meaning. Then, through her binoculars, she saw a catering worker approach the senator's box carrying a silver tray. The man was unremarkable, middle-aged, slightly overweight, the kind of invisible service worker that security details learn to ignore. But something about his movement, the way he carried himself despite the disguise, sent a chill down Sarah's spine.
You're already inside. I've been inside for 3 hours. Did you know that Senator Ashford requires a very specific brand of heart medication?
She's had a weak valve since childhood, kept it quiet for obvious political reasons. Tonight, she's going to discover that someone has replaced her pills with something much more interesting.
Sarah's blood ran cold. Ghost, that's assassination. No, Commander.
That's justice. 20 years late, but justice nonetheless. Through the binoculars, Sarah watched as the disguised ghost approached Ashford's security detail. She saw him speak briefly with one of the agents, probably asking about dietary restrictions or timing for the evening service. The agent barely looked at him, just waved him toward the private box.
Ghost, listen to me.
If you kill her like this, you'll never get the answers you're looking for. You'll never learn who else was involved, never uncover the full scope of what happened. There was a pause in the transmission. Sarah held her breath, hoping she had found an argument that would reach whatever remained of his conscience.
You're assuming I want answers from her, he said finally. But I already know everything I need to know about Catherine Ashford.
What I need from her is much simpler.
What?
I need her to suffer. Sarah watched helplessly as the ghost entered the senator's private box. Through the large windows, she could see Ashford seated at a small table, reviewing notes for her upcoming speech. The ghost moved behind her, setting down his tray and beginning to arrange items with the careful precision of an experienced server. But, then, something unexpected happened. Instead of slipping something into her drink or replacing her medication, the ghost did something that Sarah couldn't quite see. He leaned close to the senator's ear and spoke to her.
Ashford's reaction was immediate and violent.
She jerked upright in her chair, spinning to face him with a look of pure terror. Her mouth opened as if to scream, but no sound came out. Through the binoculars, Sarah could see the senator's lips moving rapidly, forming words that might have been pleas or threats or desperate attempts at negotiation. The ghost stood perfectly still, letting her speak. Sarah realized that this wasn't an assassination at all. It was a conversation. What are you saying to her? Sarah whispered into her mic. I'm telling her about her victims.
About Subject 23, who died screaming during the genetic enhancement procedures while she watched from an observation window.
About Subject 31, who was terminated because he showed emotional attachment to one of the doctors. About Subjects 15 and 16, who lived normal lives for 20 years before her people hunted them down and killed them.
Through the binoculars, Sarah saw Ashford's face go white.
The senator reached for something on her table, probably a panic button or communication device, but the ghost was faster. His hand closed over hers with gentle but inexorable pressure. I'm also telling her about the others, the ghost continued.
About the 28 children who didn't survive to graduation.
About the cover-ups and the falsified reports. About the families who were told their children died in car accidents or house fires when they were actually being dissected in laboratories to understand why the enhancements failed.
Sarah felt sick.
The scope of the atrocity was worse than she had imagined. This wasn't just about creating super soldiers, it was about systematic murder and experimentation on children.
Ghost, you said you wanted justice. This isn't justice. This is revenge. You're wrong, Commander. Justice is what comes next.
Through the binoculars, Sarah saw the ghost reach into his serving tray and withdraw something small. Not a weapon, not poison, but what appeared to be a data storage device.
Senator Ashford is going to live, he said.
But she's going to spend the rest of her life knowing that every classified file related to Project Prometheus is now in the hands of someone who knows exactly how to use them.
Sarah watched as Ashford's expression changed from terror to rage.
The senator was clearly threatening him, probably offering money or power or immunity in exchange for his silence. But the ghost simply shook his head and placed the device on the table in front of her.
The files contain everything, Commander. Financial records, medical reports, video footage of the procedures, transcripts of meetings where they discussed which children to terminate. Names, dates, locations, bank account numbers. Everything. What do you want from her? I want her to make a choice.
She can take her own life tonight, quietly and with whatever dignity she can muster. Or she can live to see every detail of Project Prometheus exposed to the world, knowing that she'll spend her remaining years in a federal prison being torn apart by families who lost their children to her ambition.
Through the binoculars, Sarah saw Ashford's shoulders slump in defeat.
The senator picked up the data device, turned it over in her hands, and then looked up at the ghost with an expression that might have been admiration. She's not going to take the deal, Sarah said.
I know. Catherine Ashford has never backed down from a fight in her life.
That's what made her so effective at covering up Project Prometheus for 2 decades.
But it's also what's going to destroy her.
The ghost began moving toward the exit of the private box, his disguise still perfect, his movements still those of an invisible service worker. As he reached the door, he turned back to the senator and said something that made her flinch as if she'd been struck.
What did you tell her?
I told her that I wasn't the only survivor of Project Prometheus. I told her that there are others, hidden around the world, and that they're all coming home.
Sarah's blood froze. Others? I thought you were the last.
Dr. Vasquez saved 3 of us, Commander. But there were other doctors, other handlers, other people with consciences who helped children escape before termination. We've been finding each other for years, comparing notes, sharing intelligence.
How many? Enough.
Through her binoculars, Sarah watched as Senator Ashford sat alone in her private box, staring at the data device in her hands. The woman who had once been one of the most powerful people in Washington now looked small and fragile, crushed by the weight of her own crimes.
Ghost, if you have evidence of everything that happened, why not just release it? Why go through this elaborate hunt? Because evidence can be discredited, files can be destroyed, witnesses can be silenced.
But fear, Commander, fear is much more powerful. When the people responsible for Project Prometheus start dying or disappearing, when their secrets start spilling into the light, the survivors will panic.
They'll make mistakes. They'll turn on each other.
And that's when we'll learn about all the other projects, all the other atrocities they've been hiding.
Sarah realized that she was witnessing something much larger than a personal vendetta.
This was the beginning of a war between the shadow government and the monsters it had created. A war that would tear apart the intelligence community and expose decades of illegal operations. Commander, the ghost's voice was softer now, almost sad.
You have a choice to make.
You can report what you've learned tonight and spend the rest of your career fighting the bureaucracy that will try to bury this story. Or you can help us finish what we started.
Help you how?
By being our voice inside the system. By making sure that when the evidence comes to light, there are people in official positions who can verify its authenticity. By protecting the investigation from the people who will try to shut it down. Sarah thought about her oath of service, about her duty to protect and defend the Constitution. She thought about the children who had been murdered in the name of national security and the families who had never learned what really happened to them. She thought about the men and women who had given those orders and, then, lived comfortable lives while their victims suffered in silence.
If I agree to help, what happens next?
Next week, files begin appearing on the desks of journalists, prosecutors, and congressional investigators. Not all at once, and not in ways that can be easily dismissed.
Slowly, carefully, methodically. And, as the investigation builds momentum, more survivors will come forward with their stories. And the people responsible? Some will try to flee.
Some will try to destroy evidence.
Some will try to have us killed.
But they've had 20 years to get comfortable and careless.
We've had 20 years to prepare for this moment.
Through her binoculars, Sarah saw Senator Ashford finally stand up from her table. The senator moved to the window of her private box and looked out over the crowd below, perhaps seeing them for the last time as a free woman. Then, she turned and walked purposefully toward the exit.
"She's leaving," Sarah reported. "I know. Let her go. Catherine Ashford isn't important anymore. She's just the first domino to fall."
"Ghost, before you disappear again, I need to know something.
How do I contact you?" "You don't, Commander. But don't worry. When we need you, we'll find you."
The transmission cut off, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and her binoculars. Below, emergency vehicles were arriving at the Kennedy Center, but not for any violence or accident. Someone had called in a bomb threat, probably the Ghost, creating a distraction that would allow him to slip away in the chaos. Sarah watched as hundreds of Washington's elite evacuated the building, their evening of self-congratulation ruined by the fear of an attack that would never come. Among them, she spotted Senator Ashford moving through the crowd like a woman in a trance, clutching a small data device that contained enough evidence to bring down the entire shadow government. As Sarah drove home through the empty streets, she thought about the choice she had been offered. She could continue her career, follow orders, and pretend that Project Prometheus was ancient history. Or she could become part of something larger, something that might finally bring justice to the victims of government atrocities. By the time she reached her apartment, Sarah Mitchell had made her decision. She sat down at her computer and began typing a resignation letter that she might never send, preparing for a war she wasn't sure she could win, against enemies she was only beginning to understand. The hunt was expanding, and Sarah was about to discover just how deep the rabbit hole of government conspiracy really went. The Washington Post newsroom was in chaos when the first cache of Project Prometheus files arrived. Senior investigative reporter Janet Chen had seen a lot of classified documents in her 20-year career, but nothing had prepared her for the manila envelope that appeared on her desk with no return address, no postmark, and security classification she had never encountered before. Commander Sarah Mitchell watched the news coverage from her office, knowing that this was just the beginning. Over the past week, similar packages had been delivered to journalists across the country, to federal prosecutors, to congressional investigators, and to family members who had lost children in suspicious circumstances decades ago. The Ghost and his network were methodically dismantling the conspiracy that had protected Project Prometheus for 20 years. Commander Mitchell, Admiral Harrison's voice on the intercom was tight with barely controlled fury. "My office. Now." Sarah had been expecting this conversation ever since Senator Ashford's public breakdown 3 days earlier. The senator had attempted suicide in her Georgetown home, only to be discovered by her security detail with a bottle of pills and a 5-page confession that detailed her role in authorizing human experimentation on children. The confession was now part of a federal investigation that was tearing through the intelligence community like wildfire. Admiral Harrison's office felt like a bunker under siege. Maps covered every surface, secure phones rang constantly, and the Admiral himself looked like he had aged 10 years in the past week. "Sarah, I need to know if you had any contact with the individual responsible for this," he said without preamble. "And, before you answer, understand that lying to me right now would be treason." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Sir, I've had contact with someone claiming to be a survivor of Project Prometheus. He provided me with information about classified programs that resulted in the deaths of multiple children." The Admiral's jaw tightened. "Why didn't you report this contact immediately?" "Because, sir, after investigating his claims, I determined that he was telling the truth." and that the people he was targeting were guilty of war crimes.
Commander, it is not your job to determine guilt or innocence. It's your job to follow orders and protect American interests.
With respect, sir, I took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution. That oath doesn't contain an exception for classified war crimes.
Admiral Harrison leaned back in his chair, studying Sarah with the careful attention of a man who had spent his career reading people's loyalties. Sarah, do you understand what you've done?
By not reporting this contact, you've enabled a terrorist operation against United States officials. Sir, I've enabled the exposure of a conspiracy that murdered children and covered it up for decades. If that makes me a terrorist, then maybe the definition of terrorism needs to be examined.
Before the Admiral could respond, his secure phone rang.
Sarah watched his face grow pale as he listened to whoever was on the other end. Understood, he said finally, hanging up. Sarah, General Morrison was found dead in his home an hour ago. Apparent suicide, along with a confession detailing his role in Project Prometheus and 17 other classified programs. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. General Morrison had been the Pentagon's liaison to the project, the man responsible for providing military oversight and ensuring operational security. His death meant that the Ghosts network was moving faster than anyone had anticipated.
Sir, how many other officials are we talking about?
Based on the files that have been released so far, at least 40 people in current government positions have direct connections to Project Prometheus. Cabinet members, federal judges, intelligence directors, congressional leaders.
Sarah, this conspiracy reaches into every level of American government. Sarah understood now why the Admiral looked so haunted.
This wasn't just about one illegal program, it was about exposing a shadow government that had operated beyond any oversight for decades. What are your orders, sir? My orders are to find this ghost and eliminate him before he brings down the entire intelligence apparatus.
And your orders are to help me do it.
Sarah felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Sir, I can't help you hunt down someone who's exposing war crimes.
Commander, that's not a request. It's a direct order.
Then, I have to respectfully decline to obey that order, sir. The silence in the office stretched for nearly a minute. Admiral Harrison had been Sarah's mentor for over a decade, the man who had shaped her career and guided her through the complexities of naval intelligence. Now they were staring at each other across a divide that neither of them could bridge. Sarah, if you refuse this order, you'll be court-martialed and dishonorably discharged.
Your career will be over. I understand, sir. And it won't stop what's happening.
These files will continue to be released, more officials will die, and the entire government will be paralyzed by scandal.
Is that really what you want?
Sarah thought about the photograph Dr. Vasquez had shown her, the innocent 8-year-old boy who had been turned into a weapon. She thought about the families who had never learned what happened to their children, and the officials who had slept soundly for 20 years knowing they had gotten away with murder. Sir, what I want is justice.
And if that means the government has to confront its own crimes, then, yes, that's exactly what I want.
Admiral Harrison nodded slowly, as if he had expected her answer.
Then, you leave me no choice. Security. 2 naval MPs entered the office, their hands resting on their sidearms.
Sarah felt her stomach drop as she realized the implications. Commander Mitchell, you're under arrest for conspiracy, treason, and providing aid to enemy operatives.
You'll be held in military custody pending investigation.
As the MPs moved to restrain her, Sarah's secure phone buzzed with an incoming message. She glanced at the screen and saw a single line of text, window.
Now.
Without thinking, Sarah dove toward the large window behind Admiral Harrison's desk. The MPs shouted and reached for their weapons, but before they could draw, the reinforced glass exploded inward in a shower of crystalline fragments. A figure in black tactical gear rappelled through the window with fluid grace, landing in the center of the office and immediately neutralizing both MPs with precise strikes that left them unconscious but breathing. Sarah recognized the movement patterns, the economy of motion, the cold efficiency that could only come from years of deadly training.
Ghost, she breathed.
Commander, he replied, his voice muffled by a tactical mask.
Time to go. Admiral Harrison was reaching for a panic button when the ghost's voice stopped him. Admiral, I wouldn't do that.
You're one of the few people involved in Project Prometheus who actually tried to limit the damage.
I'd hate to see you become collateral damage in this war.
You're him, the Admiral said, his voice filled with a mixture of fear and fascination.
Subject 17. That was never my name, Admiral. That was just a number assigned to a weapon you people created.
But, weapons, as you're learning, can choose their own targets. The ghost moved to the window and attached a rappelling line to Sarah's tactical gear with practiced efficiency.
Commander, we have about 90 seconds before this building is locked down. Are you ready to see how deep this really goes?
Sarah looked back at Admiral Harrison, the man who had shaped her career, who represented everything she had once believed about duty and service.
I'm sorry, sir. So am I, Sarah. So am I.
The descent down the side of the Pentagon was surreal, like something from an action movie rather than real life. Sarah found herself sliding down a line into a world where everything she had believed about government and justice had been turned upside down. They landed in a maintenance area where a nondescript van was waiting. The ghost guided her into the passenger seat and immediately began driving toward the exit, his movements calm and professional despite the chaos they had just left behind.
How did you know I was about to be arrested? Sarah asked. We've been monitoring official communications since this began.
When Admiral Harrison received orders to detain you, we knew we had a narrow window to extract you.
Extract me? I'm not an intelligence asset. The ghost removed his tactical mask, revealing the same calm features Sarah remembered from their warehouse meeting. Commander, you became an asset the moment you chose truth over orders. The question is, are you ready to learn how extensive this conspiracy really is?
As they drove through the Virginia countryside, Sarah began to understand that Project Prometheus was just the tip of the iceberg. The ghost showed her files on dozens of other classified programs, biological weapons testing on prisoners, mind control experiments on mental patients, assassination programs that targeted American citizens who posed threats to national security. How long has this been going on? She asked. Since the end of World War II, when we recruited Nazi scientists and learned their methods.
Project Prometheus was just one branch of a much larger tree, Commander.
A tree that's been growing in the shadows for 70 years. They arrived at a remote farmhouse as the sun was setting, its windows darkened, its appearance abandoned.
But, as they approached, Sarah could see the subtle signs of habitation, fresh tire tracks, recently disturbed earth, the kind of security measures that suggested this was a safe house.
Inside, Sarah found herself face to face with a group of people who looked remarkably ordinary. A woman in her 30s who could have been a teacher, a man in his 40s who might have worked in finance, a teenager who looked like any college student. But, when she looked into their eyes, Sarah saw the same depth of calculation, the same deadly competence that marked the ghost.
Commander Mitchell, the ghost said, meet the other survivors of America's human experimentation programs.
Over the next several hours, Sarah listened to stories that challenged everything she thought she knew about her country. She learned about children who had been kidnapped from foster homes for psychological experiments, about soldiers who had been used as test subjects for chemical weapons, about citizens who had been targeted for elimination because they had learned too much about classified operations. The network of people responsible for these programs has been operating for decades, explained Dr. Maria Santos, a survivor of a biological weapons program who now worked as a geneticist. They move between government positions, private corporations, and academic institutions. They protect each other, cover up each other's crimes, and ensure that anyone who threatens their operations disappears. But, now we have the evidence to expose them, added James Chen, a former test subject who had become an expert in financial crimes. Bank records, communication logs, video footage, medical files. Everything they thought was safely buried. Sarah realized that she wasn't just witnessing a revenge operation, she was seeing the systematic dismantling of a shadow government that had operated beyond any accountability for generations. "What do you need from me?" she asked. The ghost leaned forward, his expression serious. "We need someone on the inside, Commander. Someone with official credentials who can verify the authenticity of evidence, who can guide investigations toward the right targets, who can protect witnesses from retaliation. But, I'm about to be court-martialed for treason.
No, you're not. By tomorrow morning, you'll be dead.
Sarah felt her blood freeze.
What?
Commander Sarah Mitchell will be reported as killed in a terrorist attack while being transported to military custody. Your body will never be found, of course, because Sarah Mitchell will cease to exist. But, someone else, someone with a different name and different credentials, will begin working within the system to ensure that justice is served. Sarah understood now that there was no going back to her old life, no return to the comfortable certainties of military service. She was being offered a chance to become something else entirely, a ghost herself, operating in the shadows to bring light to decades of darkness.
And, if I refuse?
Then, you'll be returned safely to military custody, where you'll spend the rest of your life in federal prison while the people responsible for murdering children continue to hold positions of power. Sarah thought about the 8-year-old boy in the photograph, about the families who had never learned the truth, about the officials who had traded their humanity for career advancement. She thought about her oath to protect and defend the Constitution, and what that really meant in a world where the greatest threats came from within.
What would my new name be? She asked quietly.
The ghost smiled for the first time since she had met him. That, Commander, would be entirely up to you. After all, everyone deserves the chance to choose their own identity. As night fell over the Virginia countryside, Sarah Mitchell began planning her own death and rebirth. The hunt for justice was about to gain a powerful new ally, and the shadow government was about to discover that their victims had learned to fight back with weapons they had never expected: truth, evidence, and an unshakable commitment to accountability. The war was escalating, and Sarah was about to learn that sometimes the greatest act of patriotism is exposing your country's crimes to the light. 6 months after Commander Sarah Mitchell officially died in a terrorist attack that never happened, a woman named Dr. Elena Rodriguez walked through the halls of the Senate Intelligence Committee as a newly appointed oversight specialist. Her credentials were impeccable, her security clearance was beyond reproach, and her mission was to ensure that the investigation into Project Prometheus reached its logical conclusion: the complete exposure and prosecution of everyone involved. The woman who had once been Sarah Mitchell had learned to inhabit her new identity completely. The ghost and his network had been thorough in creating her background, but, more importantly, they had taught her how to think like someone who had never existed in official records. She had learned to be invisible in plain sight, to gather intelligence while appearing to be just another bureaucratic functionary. The investigation had grown beyond anyone's expectations. What had started as a single leaked file about human experimentation had become a comprehensive examination of 70 years of illegal government operations. Congressional hearings were being broadcast live on every major network. Federal prosecutors were filing charges against dozens of former and current officials. International courts were demanding extradition of war criminals who had been living comfortable lives in American suburbs. But the real work was happening in the shadows, where the ghost and his fellow survivors were methodically hunting down the network of people who had created and protected these programs. Dr. Rodriguez, Senator Patricia Williams called as Elena walked past the committee room.
"Do you have a moment?"
Senator Williams had become the public face of the investigation, a former prosecutor who had built her political career on exposing government corruption. She was also, according to the ghost's intelligence, completely clean. One of the few members of Congress who had never been approached by the shadow network, never offered bribes or threats, never compromised by the system she was now working to expose.
"Of course, Senator," Elena replied, following the older woman into her private office. "Elena, I need to ask you something confidentially. In your analysis of the Project Prometheus files, have you found any evidence that the people responsible are planning to retaliate against the investigation?"
Elena chose her words carefully. "Senator, based on the communication intercepts and financial records we've reviewed, I believe the remaining network members are more focused on destroying evidence and fleeing the country than on active retaliation."
It wasn't exactly a lie.
The official investigation was uncovering the public face of the conspiracy, but the ghost's parallel operation was handling the more dangerous aspects of bringing these people to justice. Senator Williams nodded, but her expression remained troubled. "Elena, 3 witnesses in protective custody have disappeared in the past month. The FBI claims they were relocated for security reasons, but I'm not convinced.
Elena felt a chill.
She hadn't been told about missing witnesses.
Do you have the names of the witnesses who disappeared? Dr. Michael Foster, the former head of biological research. Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Hayes, who oversaw facility security.
And Dr. James Morrison, the psychologist who developed the conditioning protocols. Elena recognized all three names from the target lists the ghost had shared with her. But, according to their intelligence, all three were supposed to have been taken into protective custody by the survivor network, not disappeared by hostile forces.
Senator, I'll look into this immediately. With your permission, I'd like to review the FBI files on these disappearances. You have my full authorization.
Elena, I have a feeling we're about to discover that this conspiracy runs deeper than even we suspected.
That evening, Elena met with her handler in a coffee shop in Georgetown.
The man she knew as Thomas was actually Subject 23, a survivor of a different experimental program who specialized in financial crimes and identity manipulation.
To anyone watching, they appeared to be a federal employee having coffee with a former colleague.
Thomas, we have a problem, Elena said quietly.
3 key witnesses have disappeared, and it's not our people who took them. Thomas's expression darkened. That's impossible. We've been monitoring all law enforcement communications. If someone moved those witnesses, we would have known about it. Unless someone with clearance levels higher than ours is involved. Someone who can operate completely outside normal channels. Thomas was silent for a long moment, processing the implications.
Elena, if there's a level of this conspiracy we haven't uncovered yet, if there are people involved who we haven't identified, then the ghost and the others could be walking into a trap. Elena felt her stomach clench. Over the past 6 months, she had come to respect and care about the survivors she worked with. They had become more than allies, they had become family, bound together by shared purpose and mutual trust.
Can you contact him? Not directly. Security protocols. But I can send a message through the network. That night, Elena lay awake in her Arlington apartment, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of the new information. If there was a hidden level of the conspiracy, if the people they had been targeting were just the visible tip of a much larger iceberg, then everything they thought they knew about Project Prometheus might be wrong. Her secure phone buzzed at 3 a.m. with an encrypted message, package delivery at sunrise. Usual location. Elena dressed quickly and drove to a parking garage in Alexandria where she had received intelligence drops before. But when she arrived, instead of finding a dead drop, she found the ghost himself waiting in the shadows. "You look concerned," he said by way of greeting. "We have missing witnesses. People who were supposed to be in federal protection have disappeared, and it's not law enforcement or our people who took them." The ghost nodded grimly. "I know. We've been tracking the situation for the past week. Elena, there's something I haven't told you about Project Prometheus." "What?" "It never actually ended. The official program was shut down in 1998, but a core group of the people involved continued the research privately. They've been operating for the past 20 years with corporate funding and international backing." Elena felt the world shift beneath her feet. That means the people we've been targeting are mostly retired administrators and bureaucrats. The real operation, the active continuation of human experimentation, has been happening in private facilities around the world. "How do you know this?" The ghost reached into his jacket and withdrew a tablet computer. The screen showed surveillance footage of what appeared to be a medical facility, with children in hospital gowns being led through sterile corridors. "Because 3 days ago, we found one of their current facilities." "Elena, they're still taking children. They're still creating weapons like us. And, now that we've exposed the historical operation, they're accelerating their timeline." Elena stared at the footage in horror. "Where is this?" "Montana. A private research compound owned by a corporation that doesn't officially exist. We've identified at least 15 children currently being held there, all between the ages of 8 and 12. We have to notify law enforcement immediately."
Elena, the people running this facility include federal judges, FBI directors, and Pentagon officials.
Some of them are the same people overseeing the official investigation into Project Prometheus. If we go through official channels, those children will be moved or eliminated before any rescue operation can reach them.
Elena understood now why the ghost had looked so grim. They weren't just fighting a historical conspiracy, they were racing against an active operation that was continuing to destroy young lives.
What do you need from me? We need you to use your position to identify everyone involved in the current operation. We need financial records, communication logs, travel schedules, security protocols.
Everything you can access through official channels.
And then? The ghost's expression was colder than Elena had ever seen it.
And then, we're going to end this.
All of it. Forever. Over the next week, Elena worked around the clock to gather intelligence on the Montana facility and the network that supported it.
What she discovered was worse than anything they had uncovered about the historical project. The current operation had international connections, with similar facilities in 12 countries. They were creating enhanced soldiers and assassins for private military contractors, intelligence agencies, and criminal organizations around the world. The missing witnesses hadn't been disappeared by the historical conspiracy, they had been taken by the current operation because they had information that could expose the ongoing programs.
Elena, Thomas said during one of their coffee meetings, we've intercepted communications suggesting that they're planning to eliminate all evidence of the current operation within 72 hours. That includes the children. Elena felt sick. How?
Fire. They're going to burn the facilities and claim the deaths were accidental. Industrial accidents, gas explosions, anything that will destroy the evidence and kill the witnesses. That night, Elena made a decision that would define the rest of her life. Instead of waiting for the Ghosts Network to plan an elaborate operation, she picked up her secure phone and called Senator Williams. Senator, I need to brief you on a situation that requires immediate federal intervention. But first, you need to understand that what I'm about to tell you will change everything you thought you knew about Project Prometheus. The conversation lasted 3 hours.
Elena revealed her true identity, explained the survival network, and provided detailed intelligence about the Montana facility.
By the time she finished, Senator Williams was pale but determined.
Elena, or Sarah, or whoever you really are, can you guarantee the accuracy of this intelligence?
Senator, I can guarantee that if we don't act in the next 24 hours, 15 children are going to die to protect secrets that should have been exposed decades ago.
Then, we act. The raid on the Montana facility was the largest federal operation in domestic history.
FBI, ATF, and military special operations teams surrounded the compound at dawn, supported by air assets and medical teams.
Elena watched the operation from a command center in Washington, praying that they weren't too late. The resistance was fierce but brief.
The facility's security team was well trained and heavily armed, but they were facing federal agents who had been briefed on exactly what they would find inside those buildings. When the shooting stopped, 12 operatives were dead and 37 people were in custody, including 2 federal judges and a sitting congressman.
More importantly, 17 children were rescued alive.
17 young lives that had been destined to be turned into weapons or disposed of as failed experiments. Elena stood in the command center as reports came in from around the world. Simultaneous raids were taking place in 11 other countries, coordinated by international law enforcement and guided by intelligence that the Survivor Network had been gathering for years. The modern version of Project Prometheus was being dismantled in a single, coordinated operation that spanned continents. But the real victory came 3 days later, when Elena received a message from an unknown number: all targets neutralized.
All children safe. Network dismantled. Mission complete.
It wasn't signed, but Elena knew it was from the ghost. He and the other survivors had been hunting the people responsible for the current operation while law enforcement handled the facilities.
The shadow network that had created them, used them, and then tried to eliminate them was finally extinct.
6 months later, Dr. Elena Rodriguez testified before Congress about the complete scope of Project Prometheus, both historical and current. Her testimony, broadcast live around the world, detailed 70 years of government-sanctioned atrocities and the heroic efforts of the survivors to bring their creators to justice. But, perhaps more importantly, she testified about redemption. About how people who had been turned into weapons by their government had chosen to become protectors of the innocent. About how the children who had been robbed of their humanity had retained enough of it to fight for justice rather than revenge. After her testimony, Elena walked out of the Capitol building and into a new world. A world where the shadow government had been exposed, where the survivors of human experimentation were recognized as heroes rather than assets, and where the children who had been rescued would grow up free from the nightmare that had consumed previous generations. She never saw the ghost again, but sometimes she received messages from around the world. Messages from a teacher in Switzerland who was helping traumatized children heal. From a doctor in South Africa who was providing free medical care to victims of violence. From a social worker in Canada who specialized in protecting children from abuse. The ghosts had found new identities, new purposes, new ways to serve humanity rather than the governments that had created them. They had chosen to become guardians rather than weapons, protectors rather than destroyers. And, in making that choice, they had proven that no matter how much evil is done in the name of power, no matter how thoroughly human dignity is violated in the pursuit of control, the fundamental goodness of the human spirit can never be completely destroyed. The man with no record, no history, and no name had forced the Navy SEALs and the entire American government to confront a simple truth: monsters are not born, they are made. But, so are heroes. And, sometimes, the same process that creates one can, in the end, produce the other. The hunt was over. Justice had been served. And, the nameless guardian had finally found his true identity, not as a weapon,